Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, senors and senoritas, everybody get ready to start your engines because we are going to take off on another episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a comic book writer of world-renowned, well-loved everywhere I go, stopped on the street and asked my autograph constantly. You get to ask me questions about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's jump right in. Joshua Ignatowski. Hello, Joshua. On a recent episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, you mentioned that you've watched a bunch of Bollywood films, which leads me to ask, which of the ones you've seen would you recommend to us in the audience? And yes, I did. I said I watched a lot of Bollywood movies because Graham Nolan and I did some work for a company called Graphics India, and we were creating comic books set in India featuring characters from India, and I wanted to know, I wasn't going to become an expert on Indian culture. I wouldn't insult them that way by saying that I could simply survey their culture and understand everything about it, but I did want to understand what their audiences expected from casual escapist entertainment. And so I watched a whole bunch of Bollywood movies, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the differences between what they expect from a movie and what American and European audiences generally expect, I should say. They do some great action stuff, and a straight-up action movie, not a full-bore Bollywood movie with singing and dancing and all the rest of it. Straight-up action movie. It's called Baby, and Baby is a code name for an operation in which special forces, Indian special forces, go after terrorists who are threatening India. And there's fantastic action scenes in Dubai. I mean, it's kind of like an Indian Mission Impossible kind of story. And it stars Akshay Kumar, is my favorite Bollywood star. Guy makes terrific action flicks. And these guys work hard. These actors, they're in a lot of movies every year. And they just sort of crank these things out. But Baby stands equal to any Western counterterrorism thriller that you would want to see. Some terrific suspense moments, and there's a lot in Bollywood action films. There's a lot of instant retribution. They'll introduce a character you really can't stand, and 5 minutes later he's dead. And the Indians don't take terrorism lightly. This is a meaner, more direct response to terrorism in these films. I mean, this is a crowd pleaser movie. Think about, Charles Bronson. If they made an anti-terrorism movie in the 70s, what it would be like. And that gives you an idea what Baby's like. But it's a, big budget production, beautifully filmed, terrific action scenes, and like I said, a lot of suspense, and the rest of it. Now, what I should warn you about Bollywood movies is they are all 2 hour and 45 minute, 3 hours long. And every Bollywood movie is really almost two movies. It's almost like you get a double feature. You get the beginning of the story where they go into the background of the characters and everything else, and then there's an intermission, and then a whole nother movie starts. And in some cases, you can see a Bollywood movie and it starts out as a romantic comedy, and then something awful happens in the first half of the movie that has to be resolved in the second half, and all of a sudden now you're watching this vicious revenge flick, or brutal, you don't know who you're messing with kind of movie. Wildly entertaining, the fact that when you go to see this movie, any movie, Bollywood movie, you're not quite sure what you're going to get, but you're going to get in most Bollywood movies, real full gear Bollywood movies, you're going to get a little bit of everything. You're going to get some comedy, you're going to get some music, you're going to get a romance, you're going to get some, ball-busting, fist-fighting action, and they really do know how to entertain. And they understand what their audiences want, and they did not lose their way the way American content producers have lost their way. Another one, which also has Akshay Kumar in it, this is a comedy. This is a straight up comedy. OMG, oh my God. And it's about a Mumbai storekeeper who falls on hard times and blames God. And he decides that he is going to sue all of the religious leaders in the country to get, repay him for the destruction of his business, because he's blaming God, that God did this to him. And it's a comedy fantasy in which Akshay Kumar, again, appears as Vishnu. And he actually appears to this guy and says, hey, I know you're suing me, but I kind of approve. I kind of approve of this populist approach, and I'm going to help you out. And he helps the store owner reveal a lot of corruption in amongst Hindu gurus and priests and the rest. It's a really funny movie, and Kumar's having the time of his life, playing a god, and it's got something to say. It's got something to say about religion, organized religion versus true faith, and all the rest of it. It's a good time. Kahani, there's Kahani and there's Kahani 2, and this was a low budget thriller, although it didn't look low budget to me. And this isn't a full bore Bollywood movie. There's no singing, there's no dancing, there's none of the rest of it. It's a really excruciating suspense film about this pregnant woman who she is emigrated to America, and her husband goes missing on a trip to India, and so she returns to India to look for him. And this woman is seriously pregnant. She's like 7.5 months pregnant, and she's playing her own detective, and she uncovers this incredible conspiracy and everything else. If you're looking for a movie that's more friendly to Western audiences, Kahani would be the one, because it uses a lot of, suspense elements and, methods to crank up the tension that we're more used to. It's shot more like a Western film. The acting is more on par with a Western film. Indian movies have their own level of over the top acting that works for these movies, because they're like operas, most of them. But this is more like a Western film. It's very, very good. It's very, very good. And like I said, the suspense is excruciating. Now, no Bollywood film list would be complete without a film of Salman Khan. Salman Khan is a huge action star over there, and he makes a series, in addition to a whole bunch of other movies that he's made. This guy's very prolific. A series of movies called Dabang. There's Dabang 2, 3, I don't know. I haven't checked lately. There might be Dabang 12 out there. And he is a badass cop. And when I say badass, you've never seen a badass cop this badass. He makes Dirty Harry look like a crossing guard. I mean, he is just, he could go up unarmed against a warehouse full of bad guys, and they're all going to get the worst of it. And he's got no problem with shooting, killing. And this is full-bore Bollywood. There's singing and dancing. There's this singer that's apparently very popular over there. I guess she's like the Indian version of Madonna. Her name is Money, and she's always in these movies, just in the singing parts. She's never part of the actual romance or action. And they sing about drinking a lot in these movies. They like to raise an elbow over there, apparently. But these are just fun, just goofy, straight out, grab you by the lapels to entertain you. And there's humor, there's romance, and there's lots and lots and lots of fighting, fist fights, shoot 'em ups, martial arts scenes, but just a groovy time. Delhi Belly is an Indian comedy that really works. Some Indian comedy doesn't work with me, but Delhi Belly works, and it's got mostly Indian cast. It's about three losers. I won't tell you any more about it, but it's like if you liked Hangover, this is actually better than that. And it oddly also has Kim Bodnia, the Danish action comedy star, in it. He shows up as a hitman in this movie. I'd love to know how that came about. But like I said, a lot of Indian comedy doesn't work for me. It's like a lot of Chinese comedy doesn't work for Western audiences. But this movie's really funny, and it keeps you guessing all the way along. Another big star, Shah Rukh Khan. I might be destroying that name. He made this movie Don, and he made Don 2. And this is a full-bore Bollywood and just crazy. This movie has a WTF ending you never see coming. You're just like, what in God's name did I just watch? And it's about a guy who has to pose as a really vicious criminal, has to go undercover as this really horrible guy. And it is just, wow. It's just nuts. It's nuts. The sequel is nuts. And the thing that really separates this is it has a oops, I'm jumping ahead. It has a let me jump ahead actually. It has a full bore, completely nuts production number that was shot during the festival of Ganesh. If you've ever seen the Hindu god, who's an elephant god, sort of sitting on a throne looking cool, this is the festival of Ganesh, and they filmed it during the festival. And it is the craziest musical production I've ever seen. I'm going to provide a link to it because there's an 8K restoration of it on YouTube that I watched, and it's amazing. Absolutely amazing, and the song's cool too. I have no idea what they're singing about, but the song is cool too. So I highly recommend Don and Don 2. Don 2, you gotta watch Don 2 because the ending of Don 1 leaves you in over your head. You're like, I gotta know more about why this movie ended like this. So pretty crazy. Now, Shah Rukh Khan is in another film called Chennai Express, which was hugely popular. Big blockbuster entertainment. Again, another full-bore Bollywood movie. It's a romantic comedy. It's an action comedy. And it made buckets of money in India because it featured the biggest star in southern India and the biggest star at the time, Shah Rukh Khan, in northern India. And so both audiences went to see it. You got to remember, India is a country, a lot of different ethnic groups within the subcontinent, and a lot of language differences and cultural differences and all the rest. And somebody very wisely decided, well, let's make a movie to appeal to both those audiences. And it's a lot of fun, a lot of fun. Twin Spin. Joshua Ignatowski is back with, do you have a favorite reality TV show? If so, which one and why? Not a big reality TV, because most reality TV shows are BS and staged and contrived and all the rest of it. So not real big on them. Although I do really like Clarkson's Farm. Jeremy Clarkson. a guy from England who you either love or hate, apparently, in England. A lot of people just hate this guy, but American audiences love him from Top Gear, and he buys a farm with his buckets of money that he made off the BBC before they let him go, and he and apparently Amazon threw millions and millions at him, and he bought this farm, and we get to see him at work with his wife and this local farmer he hired who became a reality TV star of his own, and we get to see the day-to-day workings of this. I guess it's like a 200-acre farm in the Midlands in Britain, and all the problems and complications And I like this show because Clarkson's funny. I find him funny. Other people apparently find him grating. And I can see why. He's brash and annoying and everything else. But that's what's endearing about him. That's what's funny about it. But largely, I like the show because it exposes the problems of big government and overregulation and things like that. The British government makes it so difficult to be a farmer, much the same way that our government in Washington, D.C., plagues farmers with rules and regulations and codes and all the rest of it. And it all ends up making our food more expensive and takes away our freedoms. And apparently in Britain, they get even more into this. Every plan that he has, which would benefit his farm and benefit the community as well, he runs headlong into local councils and things like that, and has to spend as much time finagling around with legalities as he does actually raising crops or animals. So, but it's my favorite. It's funny. A lot of it's really funny. Now, is it contrived? Like, yeah, it's got like what I feel are phony time constraints. Like, we've got to do this all by tomorrow, or we've got 3 days to build this barn. And in reality, they just threw that ticking clock in there, and they probably spent 3 months building whatever it is that they say they built in 3 days. But I'll excuse all of that because there is at least a lot of reality about how difficult farming is, all of the variables, how things can go horribly wrong far more often than they go right, and the science and technology and things that, because farmers are scientists. You can't be a farmer even if you, back in the day, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, if you were an illiterate farmer, you were still a scientist, because you had to learn so much about chemistry and physics and weather and things like that. And, as the mechanical age came upon us, you had to learn about machinery. I think most farmers farmers became computer savvy before the rest of us. They were the first segment of the working population that really became computer savvy and savvy about satellites and things like that, because they had to, because all of that aided them in their work. So it's a cool series. I really like it. Apparently it's one of the most popular things on Amazon. It's extraordinarily popular. So and they made this young guy whose name I can't remember, who Clarkson hired as his assistant, turn this guy into like a superstar over in Britain. David Wolfe. Why are mysteries so hard to write? Whether it's comics, novels, TV, or movies, so many mysteries seem to rely heavily on contrivance or nonsensical plot twists, often after excellent build-ups. So is the key to a good mystery just being able to stick the landing? If so, what's the key to that? Yeah, largely that's it. The mystery has to make sense. It has to... See, a mystery story has to engage you, like any other story. It has to engage you. It has to make you sympathetic toward the characters and all of that. But the added burden is that the mystery's fuel is it runs on curiosity. Who is the man in the mustard yellow hat? Who killed, Lady Edna in the drawing room at midnight? What's the identity of that body found floating in the Thames? And why why was he wearing his underwear on the outside of his pants? You set up this mystery, but then you've got to resolve it in a way that, like you said, it doesn't seem contrived or just pulled out of nowhere. It's like I watched, you see the Knives Out movies, and they rely entirely on contrast. They get the engaging part right. They get the interesting characters part right. And then, it's Ryan Johnson who runs those movies. Everything else seems to be just pulled out of thin air, or the resolution to the mystery really doesn't pay off. It just wasn't that interesting. Which is odd, because Ryan Johnson produces the Poker Face show, which week after week presents a mystery done backward style. I'll get into that, where we see the murderer and then how is the resolution going to come about. And they're far more clever than the Knives Out movies, and it's episodic TV. You think you put more work into the movies. In any case, there's different kinds of mysteries. There's what I consider the mechanical mystery, but Agatha Christie, champion. She's synonymous with the cozy mystery, with the whodunit, with the mechanical mystery, where she presents some, crazy sets of circumstances that there's no way to explain. And her various detective characters have to work through all the clues and suspects till they get to who did it, how they do it, and not let them get away with it. And she's the recognized queen. I'm not a big Christie fan because I feel her mysteries are a bit too mechanical. I don't care about any of her victims. Her victims are like ciphers. They're just parts of a puzzle. I never really get that engaged with her stories. I much prefer, in the same realm, Dorothy L. Sayers, creator of Lord Peter Wimsey. Her books seem to have more on their mind. You do care about the victims. The mysteries are like, well, how the hell did that happen? How are you going to explain this in a way that makes any sense? And I really just love the character of Peter Wimsey. He's just three-dimensional character you really learn to care about. And he not only engages you, but he doesn't ask for your sympathy, but he gets it because the guy suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder from serving in the trenches in World War I, but he masks it under this like seemingly bulletproof elan. I mean, this guy just has this casual, charming way to go about things. I also like Dorothy L. Sayers stuff because there's a lot of really funny stuff in it. In her first novel, Lord Peter Wimsey's mother attends an autopsy, and that scene is priceless. It's right out of P.G. Wodehouse. So I dig her stuff the most. And, she not only builds a believable mystery with a terrific resolution, she nails the characters so much better and makes you care about them. Monk is another example of that kind of thing. It's an engaging character. It's a flawed character, but he's going through these whodunits. And Monk, to me, week after week, delivered solid mysteries that you were invited to try to work out yourself. In many cases, like in Agatha Christie, like in Dorothy L. Sayers, you are presented with all the clues. You could stay ahead. But very rarely on Monk did I ever solve the crime ahead of Monk. Sometimes I had an inkling. I think it might be this. I think this might be the gimmick. But a lot of times I was wrong, and a lot of times I only had half the story. And almost every time Monk delivered a solution that made you slap yourself in the forehead and go, man, why didn't I see that? It was right there. It was right there in front of my face. And this is the result of a writer's room. These guys sweated on this show each week because they knew the appeal. Not only are you coming back to see Tony Shalhoub and the rest of the cast, marvelous cast, but they knew they couldn't just rest on that. That you like the characters. They couldn't rest on that. They knew that you were coming back also to see these puzzlers, these really solid whodunit stories. And that writer's room was just full of masters of the craft. And of course, you got Sherlock Holmes, which, a lot of people say, created the genre. He had a lot of competition at the time. There were a lot of people writing consulting detective stories. And of course, Edgar Allan Poe, we got to go back to Edgar Allan Poe for the first whodunit. And really, even further back, there was a real life consulting detective kind of character in Paris in the early 1800s named Vidocq. And he's a real life guy, and he used disguises and things like that. And a lot of the stories, the true stories about Vidocq, serve as whodunits, and obviously served as models for Edgar Allan Poe's detective characters and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's detective characters as well. But, again, all of the Sherlock Holmes stories are solid whodunits. Where the resolution of it is like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Or the best resolution of a whodunit is the resolution that throws you back through the rest of the story. So you're remembering the bits and pieces. You're looking back upon the clues, sort of flashing back in your own mind. Columbo, like I said, like Poker Face uses the same format where we see the murder, and then how is Columbo going to solve it? What mistakes did the killer make that Columbo's going to pick up on? And of course, the best Columbo stories are the ones where you think that, hey, maybe this time the guy's going to get away with it. I can't see how Columbo's going to find anything. This seems like a pretty flawless, perfect crime. And these vary. Columbo varies. Sometimes he just breaks the guy down, breaks the man or woman down who are the killer, and sometimes he actually does find the clue that you missed while you were watching it. That's stuck out to the lieutenant. But then, you've got the private eye genre, which is a different brand of mystery. You're more engaged with the lead character. The whodunit aspects of it are less important than the journey that the private detective takes. Although, Dashiell Hammett's whodunits were pretty damn good. Raymond Chandler, as I always say, Raymond Chandler, not a plot guy. The mystery in a Raymond Chandler novel didn't really matter. But Chinatown, which if you're watching is pictured here, is a pretty damn good whodunit. The resolution of that story, the reveals, you don't see them coming. The clues are not apparent. I mean, they're there, but they're not apparent, and it follows the classic private eye tropes of having the lying female client. She can't tell the truth, and it's up to the private detective to peel away the layers of the onion to find the rotten core of it all that the female character is hiding. But largely, for the most part, the private eye story depends upon engaging you with the character. I mean, Magnum P.I., yeah, he solved mysteries, but mostly you were there to see, Magnum, you were charmed by Tom Selleck's performance. The mysteries, the crimes that he was solving, they're really secondary to a largely character-driven story. The stories were solid, but they weren't memorable. Like Monk. Monk's stories are memorable. You're like, oh man, I remember that one, but I don't remember how it ended. Which is why I think I've watched every episode of Monk like 5 times, and 3/4 of the time I can't remember the mystery, the resolution of the mystery. I remember the story, I remember the bad guy, can't remember the resolution. Mystery, it's heavy lifting, and my favorite kind of mystery is the police procedural mystery, which isn't as gimmicky. It's something happens, a murder, a robbery, whatever, and the cops have to follow the clues and interrogate witnesses and the rest of it. Those are my favorites because these are real life mysteries. This is how actual detectives work, and you learn a lot of forensics and science. Everything from Law and Order to CSI to all the way back to Dragnet. The police procedural mystery is probably my favorite, but they're hard to write. They're hard to write because you can't have a disappointing ending. You can't have either an ending that comes out of nowhere, like you cheated, like here's a clue that I didn't tell you about. The killer had a twin brother. So that kind of nonsense. So it's really got to work. And a good mystery, I think, is written backwards, where something the reader doesn't, and you kind of work backwards from that, or some odd fact about murder, or some scientific thing, or some artistic thing, It can be anything, literary references. There's all kinds of like knowledge that you have that most people don't, and you can hinge your mystery off of that. It's probably the laziest way to do it, but it still leads to a good resolution. I talked about in other videos how I wrote a Batman mystery story that hinged on the fact that if you freeze a body, its fingerprints shrink. So there you go. I mean, on the subject of fingerprints, did you know that koala bears have fingerprints and they're identical to human fingerprints, except of course they would be the fingerprints of a child because a koala isn't very large. And you could certainly do a whodunit based off of that. Killer turns, they're searching for a little child, and the killer turns out to be a koala bear. But that's that's an example. It's a silly example, but it's an example of how you could write an entire mystery with that being a resolution. And come on, if you read a 200-page mystery novel, that the ending, the surprise ending was that the koala bear did it. That'd be pretty cool. Anyway, maybe somebody's already written one. Oh, Kieran Brunkard, have you ever written sports comics before? Not really. And sports comics are something that you don't see a lot of out there. I remember DC Comics had strange sports stories they experimented with the 60s, brought it back in the 70s. I don't think it lasted very long. I guess they were trying to get jocks to buy comics. And when I was growing up, jocks really didn't buy comics, particularly in the 70s. Joe Palooka had a long run at Harvey. He sold millions of copies of Joe Palooka comics. Joe Palooka, if you don't remember, was a newspaper strip about a down-on-his-luck boxer who it ran for decades. It was in our local paper. I think the Philadelphia Inquirer ran Joe Palooka. And very popular comic book from Harvey. But I never really did a sports comic except, back when I was in junior high, I drew a lot of comics. I drew a lot of my own comics to entertain myself. And I would write them and pencil and ink them and letter them myself. And I remember doing one inspired by Joe Namath's come from behind win at one of the earliest Super Bowls. This was the Super Bowl between the Jets and I can't remember the other team. Sports fans out there are screaming at me. It was either 68 or 69, and nobody thought the Jets would win. And Joe Namath just comes out of nowhere. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew his name on Sunday morning, and everybody knew his name on Monday morning. It was one of those Cinderella stories in sports, and it was a huge story. And it put the Super Bowl on the map. You may be surprised to learn that nobody watched the Super Bowl. Super Bowl was a ratings loser. No one was interested in it when they first aired it. Football on TV, actually, in general, was a loss leader for the networks. They didn't get a lot of TV viewership. And it wasn't until NFL Films, which was an outfit in Philadelphia, sort of revolutionized how to cover, how to film, how to do TV coverage of a football game, that really brought football more into the homes of people. I mean, more people watch basketball and baseball on television because they had figured out how to cover it correctly, and you couldn't get a lot of people to watch football on TV. And if you saw some of the TV coverage from the 60s, you'd understand why. But Joe Namath put it on the map, and I did a comic. I wasn't a sports guy or anything else, but it was such a huge story that I wrote a comic book story about Joe Namath, which was largely fictional and largely very much like a 1930s sports film, more like a Newt Rockne All-American or Babe Ruth story kind of story with lots of sentiment and ancillary characters. I don't have it anymore. I mean, I think I drew it on like typewriter paper back in the day, but that's really the only that I can think of, unless somebody digs up a sports comic that I forgot. Because I'm not a big sports guy, so I never really felt driven to write a sports comic, although I find it interesting. And if you ever look up the sports comics that DC did, they had an interesting way of doing it that I guess Carmen Infantino came up with, where the action from each panel would be carried over into the captions. Take a look at it. I wish I had an example to show you right now, but I don't. But take a look at it. When I was a kid, I would buy those comics because I was fascinated by the storytelling technique that Infantino was using, where he would carry over the action into captions with silhouetted characters, with silhouetted, the pitcher would throw the ball in the regular panel, and then there would be a caption panel, and in silhouette you would see the batter hitting the ball. It's kind of an interesting idea. So, hey, I got more to say, but I want to let you know, if you have questions, awesome questions like the ones that are being asked here, please send them to brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. And now back to the game. Michael Partika, the scenario. You've been writing a particular title for years, say 30 plus issues. You have a comfortable grasp on the main characters, the supporting cast, the setting, etc. Now it's time to write the next script. Assuming that you're not in the middle of a specific story arc, what's your process for coming up with the next issue's plot? Do you have a list of go-to questions that you cycle through in order to find the next story? He continues with his first specific question. Is there a loose thread from prior issues I can expand upon or tie up? Yeah, I mean, that's I've described before, particularly at DC Comics, they put forward this ABC storytelling. You had an A plot, which was your new plot. You had a B plot, which was a plot that was ongoing. You were like in the middle of this subplot. Then you had a C plot, which was wrapping up. It was a subplot that was wrapping up in that issue. So it was something borrowed from the way they do soap operas, where in a monthly comic you had basically 3 storylines running at all times, and so you could keep engaging the reader and make sure you brought them back next month. And so you would want to leave a little something behind. If you're doing like a three issue arc, you want to wrap up the main thing. Nightwing catches the Riddler at the end of the 3rd issue of the arc, but in the background you've left this little thread of a story that you come back the next issue to tie up. Your main story's over, but the mystery character lurking in the background, the man in the red car who keeps following Nightwing around, we're going to find out the next issue who the man in the red car is, hopefully. It's got to come back next month to find out. Another question from Michael: is there a loose thread from prior issues I can expand upon or tie up? I think I repeated my question here. Yeah, what did I do? I misnumbered. I'm always doing that, misnumbering pages, misnumbering questions. But let's move on. I had an image for that. Yeah, I mean, a prime example of that would be like, Peter Parker not being able to decide between Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy. And you could keep that, and they did. They kept it boiling for like 2 years, maybe more. And it was in the background all the time, which one's he going to go for? And that's the kind of thing that, you don't resolve right away. You just sort of let it boil under, him fighting the Rhino and him fighting Kingpin and all the rest of it. Underneath all of that is, trouble at home. Which girlfriend? Betty or Veronica? Michaels asks, a question I might ask myself before I write the next issue: is there a story in the news I can quote unquote rip from the headlines? My one and only Iron Man story was done that way. I was given just a couple of days to come up with an Iron Man plot, and I was like, I don't know, a standalone Iron Man story. Let me see, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it was like, option paralysis. Although I want to do something with him with S.H.I.E.L.D., because those are my favorite Iron Man stories, when he would be involved with Nick Fury and operating with S.H.I.E.L.D., in cooperation with S.H.I.E.L.D. And that day on the news, it came about the submarine, the Soviet submarine, the Kursk, sank to the bottom of the North Sea. And I thought, well, there's my story. Iron Man goes down there to try to rescue the Russian sailors in a submarine. He's the only man that can do it in his Iron Man costume. And so that was literally Rip screaming from the headlines. Another one that really wasn't from the headlines, but was from the newspaper. And I read the newspaper, Wall Street Journal was my go-to. And I would read it. They had an art theft column. They used to have an art theft column. I mean, boy, that was a treasure trove of information. But, Wall Street Journal would write about crime, science, blah, 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 blah. And I read this great article, and it was a review of a book about scoring baseball. And then we're back to sports. So I guess I did write a sports story. Scoring baseball games. And that's when you have your little scorebook and you write down, home run, single, double if you're a fan. And they were reviewing a book about it. And I became fascinated. And so I bought the book. And the guy talks about how people used to do this. They would get, at the beginning of the season, they would follow the team, they would get their scorebook. And, you could read that scorebook and replay the game in your mind just by reading these little symbols and these little grids. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating that someone would do that. And people would, longtime fans would have, dozens and dozens and dozens of these score books all the way back from when they were a little kid. And the book went on to describe how you would score a baseball game. Again, not a sports guy, but sports interest me as a story. Sports interest me, the conflict. You have heroes, you have villains, you have losers, you have winners. And you have these great, tall tales about sports. And, this is fascinating me. This is like mathematics meets sports. And so I wanted to do a Riddler story in which scoring a baseball game was the recurring theme in the Riddler's riddles. Now, you talk about writing a mystery and setting a challenge in front of yourself. It took me 2 years to figure out how this story would work. And I bought dozens of riddle books, and I still ended up having to write most of the riddles myself. And of course, I learned a lot about baseball scoring and about baseball, but not actually ripped from the headlines, but certainly inspired by reading a newspaper article. And so many of the things that I wrote, I recently was looking back at my G.I. Joe run, and I read a review about a book about the Surcouf, which was a submarine cruiser, a French submarine cruiser built in the 1930s. So it was ultimately captured by the Japanese when the war began, Second World War began. And I read all about this cruiser, and I thought, man, I'd love to write a story about a submarine cruiser. Submarine cruiser is basically just a gigantic submarine. And this submarine was so big, it had an airplane in a hangar. That's how big it was. And so I get to write G.I. Joe, and one of the first thoughts when I was writing G.I. Joe was, I'm gonna get a submarine cruiser into this story. And I did. I wrote a 3-issue arc featuring Cobra's submarine cruiser, which I can't remember the name of it. But so yeah, I mean, anything can inspire you, but certainly watching the news could clue you into a story. Michael's back with, what does it look like people are buying? Do I ask myself, what does it look like people are buying in other comics? Not so much. I don't really, you can't guess what your audience wants. And also, you might go, well, people are buying this, they like this, I'm going to do that same thing. No, I prefer to counter program and not do what everyone else is doing, or not do what is popular at the moment, but do something else, and so it'll be different. So you'll have a choice. So yeah, I've never really done that. Oh, Michael asks another question that I might ask myself before starting a story. Is there a question about the character, main or supporting, that I could answer in a story? Yeah, I mean, I introduced Blue Beetle into Birds of Prey because I liked Blue Beetle, and I thought Ted Kord and Barbara Gordon as Oracle would have a natural rapport since they're both into tech. and all the rest. And I introduced this idea that Ted Kord had a fatal disease. He was suffering from a disease that might be terminal unless he could find a cure. And I was able always to go back to that. And each time we saw Ted Kord, and I thought it added a dimension. My intention was, eventually to cure him. I had no interest in having Ted Kord die of a terrible disease, but I just thought it added an extra dimension to him, and also it supplied me with all these subplots and a continuing tension. As he obviously was losing weight. He obviously was less well over time, and I was leading to a big story arc involving the Batman titles, but I never got to do that. But that kind of thing you want to do. You want to have a character in suspension. That there's something going on with that character you can keep revisiting. But the important thing is to pay off. I mean, I've seen a lot of comic book writers introduce subplots like that, and they never pay them off. It just goes on and on and on and on. Like Aunt May's heart condition. I mean, Aunt May had a weak heart for decades. The poor woman. Michael asks if I might ask myself, is there a particular villain I'd like my characters to face? Yeah. I mean, this was a big driver, especially if you got on a franchise that you loved as a kid or whatever. Or, in the case of something like the Condiment King or Lockup, a brand new villain, a brand new Batman villain gets introduced through the cartoon, and I'm like, oh man, I want that guy. I want to write a story about that guy. So, and then of course that's, a big part of the fun of writing comics. I've got this hero that I grew up reading as a kid. Now I'm writing him, and now I get to pick which villains he faces. I mean, come on, that's an enviable position for anybody, any fan geek. And of course, Dr. Doom. It's like, boy, I get to write Dr. Doom. I get to write the Joker. I get to write Ventriloquist. I mean, I get to write all of these great characters. Ulik the Troll. I mean, if you're put in a position where you can reach out throughout that comic book universe and pull in whatever villain you want, that's a big question you're going to ask yourself. Michael Bartica with another question that I might ask myself before I start writing. Does your process differ whether you've been writing for 30 plus issues or less than 3? I mean, if you're writing, a 3-issue arc, and you don't know if you're going to be on the book for years, you want to write a beginning, middle, and end. You're not going to be really setting up a lot of loose threads to continue with, because you don't know if you're going to be on the book or not. But I have done that. I mean, Batman and the Outsiders. When I was on Batman and the Outsiders, I wrote a lot of scripts way beyond where they cut me off. And I was leading this big story about finding water on the moon, and it involved Aquaman and blah, blah, blah. They find this ocean underneath the moon's surface. And I was really going somewhere with all of that stuff, but I didn't get to go there. But so when you're writing a 3-issue arc, you're very conscious that I might only be writing this 3-issue arc. So it completely changes what you're doing. Now you might be writing a 3-issue arc in the middle of a long run. And so you've got to be cognizant of where the previous writer left characters, and you can, you're going to move them along a little bit. You're going to revisit subplots. But if you only want a book for 3 issues, you can't be resolving those subplots. Usually, you're just sort of going to do a soft resolve, and then still leave it dangling for the next guy who picks up if it's not going to be your book. Hey. While I still have you, Guns of Mars. It's in French. It's in German. It's Italian. It's available on Kindle. It is, and we can paperback soon. I was hoping the paperbacks would be out by now. I will provide a link below so you can go over and pick up a Kindle copy. Paperbacks and hardbacks are coming soon. They promised me you'll have your choice between getting a paperback or a hardback print-on-demand edition. But it's available on audio. Really nice audio edition. It's AI audio, but I approved it. It sounded good, and the AI got the pronunciations right, which is weird. because, I didn't provide any guide, but I listened to it. I'm like, he pronounced all the crazy names I made up and all the Barsoomian stuff, pronounced it correctly. So if you're the kind of person that digs an audiobook, pick up Guns of Mars. It's my version of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barzoom. Takes place 1,000 years after John Carter, and it is an action shoot 'em up. And go over to Subscribestar if you want to support me. There's a $1 tier, a $5 tier. When you join, you get actual, physical goodie. I'm sending out more physical goodies this month. I'm sending out free copies of Civil War Adventures Volume 1 by me and Gary Quapis. All members, all $5 members get a copy of the Civil War Adventures. And every month there's digital goodies, lost scripts. I once sent out my treatment for Expendables 2. Things like that. Things you're not going to ever see anywhere else. So anyway, that's about it for this week. I want to thank you for listening, watching, liking, subscribing, and all the rest. And hopefully I will see all of you down the road.